What is up, my bodyweight warriors, and welcome back to another video. Today, as promised, I want to share with you what I am personally doing to fix golfer's elbow and share with you my full approach, routine, supplements, everything that I'm going to be doing to rehab as quick as possible. Before we jump into today's video, know that a lot of this information can be applied to other injuries that you have. Additionally, I'm not going to be going into a huge amount of detail into every single point because otherwise this video would be like 30 minutes long. What I will do is include a bunch of links and information in the description down below so you can hop to whatever part is relevant to you and find all the relevant information down there. Also remember that this is me specifically, my approach. There is several ways to skin the cat, so don't just take it at my word. Go try some movements, try and see what works for you. As a good starting point, I think this would help. I'm going to split this video into 5 different parts, 5 different areas that I'm focusing on with my rehab journey. First is rest, second is mobility, third is movement, fourth is blood flow, and fifth is supplementation / nutrition. Let's jump into the video. First, let's talk about rest. It is probably the hardest but most important step on your rehab journey. For me, I tried to train through the pain that I was getting with golfer's elbow, changing movements, avoiding, but ultimately rest is going to be key to starting this process. At a minimum, I really suggest taking rest from movements that aggravate your injury. So golfer's elbow, for example, I am not even going to think about touching pull-ups or bicep curls for quite a while. I have relatively pain-free with like neutral grip rows, with push-ups, with planche and handstands, but I'm personally staying definitely away from movements that aggravate my injury. Going on from this, you can actually take rest from training altogether. You only have a limited recovery capacity, and if you're trying to recover from an injury, but you're occurring a lot more muscle damage for additional training that you're already doing, it's going to take a little bit longer because you only have a limited recovery capacity. I am actually taking a full week off training. I kind of feel like I need it generally as a kind of a mental break. However, I am keeping active. I'm moving every day. I'm just going for a walk, or I'm doing a little bit of stretching. Nothing intense, just light, just to rest up and recover. But just straight resting isn't the best way to rehab these injuries. You want to be moving the joint, which kind of brings me on to part 2, and that is mobility. Mobility is definitely my foundation before movement when it comes to this rehab. First of all, I am doing a lot of soft tissue work. Every single day, regardless that I'm actually in a week of rest at the moment, I'm still doing soft tissue work and mobilizing my forearm. The soft tissue work can be done with a golf ball, a lacrosse ball, apparently a wine cork as well. Again, that'll be linked in the description, as well as a massage technique that you can do with just your fingers. I've personally been using a mixture of a golf ball and then also this spiky double lacrosse ball thing, which again, I'll link to in the description, and that's been working wonders. I've been spending kind of 15 to 20 minutes a day foam rolling out my forearms, specifically the wrist flexors. I'll wake up, I'll spend 5 to 10 minutes in the morning, I'll do 5 minutes before my rehab session, and then I'll also do 5 to 10 minutes in the evening before bed. It's really easy. You can just sit at a table, watch TV, drink your coffee or whatever, and rub out those wrist flexors. So as well as this soft tissue work, I'm also performing mobility work. And when we're doing mobility work and we're looking at an issue or a restrictive joint, we've got to consider what Kerry Starrett calls upstream and downstream of that restriction. So in this case, we want to look at the elbow, of course, but we also want to be looking at the wrist and the shoulder. I personally have poor shoulder flexibility. It's something that I've really struggled with throughout my training and I'm working hard to improve. So for me, I am mobilizing my shoulder on a daily basis. I have a routine that I will actually share with you in a completely separate video because I want to go in depth with that one because I've created a really nice routine that I found to be very effective personally. I'm doing that mostly daily, maybe 5 days a week with my rehab sessions. And I'm also doing wrist flex mobility every single day with my rehab sessions. In terms of the wrist flexibility, we're looking at stretching out the wrist flexors. So to give you a few examples of the stretches that I'm using, the first would be just a standard externally rotated wrist flexor stretch on the floor with your fingers facing back at you, simply holding this position for about 30 seconds and doing a few sets. I'm also doing it in an internally rotated position where the fingers still point out back to your body, but your hands are rotated around the other way. Again, 2 to 3 sets of 30 seconds. And then finally, I'm also experimenting with kind of this elevated finger stretch where I'm using a foam roller to really maximize the stretch through the fingers and get some leverage to really stretch out those wrist flexors. This is actually probably my favorite one, with the elevated on a foam roller. Again, holding that position for a few sets of 30 seconds. You don't have to do all 3. I've usually been doing just 1 per session for those 3 sets. And that is following after some soft tissue work. Then this kind of brings me on to movement. Movement is really essential for rehabbing, especially tendon work, because they don't get their own blood flow. It's really important to keep that joint moving, keep it active, but try to avoid movements that are painful. Some of the literature does support that you can train or do movements that do aggravate your injury, but only if you notice that your issue is getting better. If it starts regressing and getting worse, then it's probably best to avoid those movements, those rehab exercises that do cause pain. In terms of the approach that I'm applying, once I have a good range of motion, the kind of common protocol seems to be working firstly isometrics, then eccentrics, and then doing full movements with concentrics as well. An example of an isometric movement I saw on Dr. Jacob, I can't remember his name, on Instagram, and he was simply holding his arm out in a fist, and he was holding isometric contractions at 45 degrees at neutral, and then 45 degrees the other way, and then as maximally extended position, just holding isometric contractions for between 30 and 45 seconds. Again, I'll link to his post in the description down below. Additionally, I've been doing eccentric work. I've been doing a mixture of the TheraBand. You can do, I can't remember the exact name for it, but there's one for golfer's elbow where you start with your elbow flexed, your wrist flexed, holding the TheraBar parallel to the ground at your chest. You then use your other arm to reach over, grab it. You would then extend both arms out, and there is a twist tension on the TheraBand. You then do a slow eccentric movement using the band's resistance to aid you, and then you repeat that process for between 10 and 15 reps. And again, just like the stretches, we're doing 2 to 3 sets. Another option would be doing like a wrist hammer twist or something. I basically found a croquet mallet, strap some weight to it, and then you essentially start from a neutral position, and then you slowly do an eccentric movement of supinating your wrist, and then use your other arm to assist to bring the weight back up, and repeat again for that 10 to 15 rep range, looking for about 3 to 5 second eccentric. Those are just 2 of the exercises that I found useful. There are probably a load more. Then moving on to finally concentrics, you can do movements like the wrist curl, which would just be simply with a dumbbell, doing some nice slow movements. There is evidence for using heavier weight and slower contractions. I will link to that in the description down below, but I haven't properly looked into that one. I'm not personally intending on using it. You could also do, additionally to the eccentric movement, but concentric movements of that wrist hammer rotation thing. Then finally, moving on to some more compound movements, you could start adding in some bicep curls and maybe even some neutral grip rows, which is what I intend to do in the near future. Then as part of our movement, we also want to strengthen the opposing muscles, which would be the wrist extensors. The exercise that I like most for this is primarily novel wrist movements. This is something that I discussed in my wrist preparation routine for handstands and planche, something I usually do daily but I haven't been doing lately. I will link to it in the description down below rather than re-explain it in this video. You can also do reverse wrist curls, which is just the opposite to the wrist curls that I mentioned previously, and then also reverse bicep curls. Again, if you're pain-free on these movements, which I personally am, I've been doing these again daily. So how does a routine look if we're combining both the mobility and the movement? First of all, you start with that soft tissue work, as I mentioned. Then you mobilize, you stretch out those tight areas. Then we move on to our rehab movement. Personally, I'm still kind of working eccentrics, a mixture of, as I said, the TheraBand and then also the wrist hammer rotations. And then finally, moving on to some wrist extensor straightening. I've been doing novel wrist movements as well as a mixture of reverse bicep curls, and reverse wrist curls. All of these are done for between 2 to 3 sets. I've been doing the rehab exercises for between 15 and 20 reps, and the strengthening exercises closer towards that 10 rep mark. Then we move on to part 4, and that is blood flow. There's 2 parts to this. The first is heat temperature adjustment. So this would involve ice and a heat pack. I have been icing my elbows on and off kind of a few days a week, and I have found it's been beneficial. The approach that I've used is basically a bowl of ice water and a bowl of kind of lukewarm 30 to 40 degrees water. And I've basically been spending 2 minutes in one bowl and then 2 minutes in the other, because I've got golfer's elbow on both elbows. I've been sat on my desk, one elbow in one elbow in the other, and every 2 minutes I'm swapping around, and I'm gonna repeat that process for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then I've been following that up with heat, which is the other element. As mentioned before, your tendons aren't so good when it comes to blood flow, so it's important to help that. Heat is a great way at bringing blood flow into an area. I've just been using a mini hot water bottle and heating it up, holding it on an individual elbow for 10 to 15 minutes, refreshing it, and then putting it on the other side. I've been doing that one. If I ever do icing, I always do heat afterwards to make sure that joint is nice and warm. And I've also been doing that every single evening before bed. Next for blood flow is voodoo flossing. This is another thing from Kelly Starrett's book, Becoming a Supplemented. And actually I have felt huge benefits from doing this exercise. It makes your elbow feel so good afterwards. I will link to a full tutorial on how to voodoo floss your elbow, because the man himself can explain it much better than I can. But essentially you're doing restrictive blood flow movement of the joint with that voodoo floss band around for 2 minutes, then you're whipping it off, letting the blood come back in and really rush back into that arm. And then while that's happening, I've been doing the other side, and I've been doing 3 rounds, so 3 2 minutes on each arm, maybe 2 times a week. Then finally we move on to supplements / nutrition. The supplementation is going to be all about anti-inflammatory and then providing stuff that our tendons need to recover. Eating an anti-inflammatory diet is going to help primarily. On top of this, I've been taking fish oil and cod liver oil, but I do that anyway, so it doesn't really make a huge difference. I also have been upping my intake of turmeric because it has an incredible anti-inflammatory benefit as well. I have also been making sure I keep up with my consumption of bone broth, which is a good source of collagen and gelatin, which again is really, really important for keeping those joints nice and healthy. But I have been having this on a daily basis for a long time. And then also combining that with vitamin C, because vitamin C is needed for your own body's production of collagen. And then finally some topical supplements. I've been using Traw Meal, which is basically arnica cream with a bunch of essential oils and a couple of minerals in it. I've been putting that on my arm in the mornings, and then in the evening I've been doing the same again, but then I've additionally been applying eucalyptus and wintergreen essential oil with a little bit of hemp oil on as well. And then I wrap it in cling film, and then I sleep with my arm in cling film, because what that does is that cling film is ensuring the cream is, for one, staying on your arm and not rubbing off in your bed sheets, but it's also increasing the temperature of that area locally, and therefore hopefully increasing blood flow to that area for recovery. This is I think a Poliquin technique, but I actually found it through Edo Portal. I'll again link in the description below to everything that I have talked about. So that's it. That's kind of a whistle-stop tour of what I plan on doing, or what I'm currently doing to fix my elbows. I'm sharing pretty much everything that I'm doing at the moment on Instagram. If you want to follow me on a day-to-day basis, I post lots of stories and also actual posts. I know I whizzed through this quite quickly, but again, more information will be available in the description down below. I'll be linking to as much as I can so you have all the information. But if you have any more questions, leave a comment in the comment section down below. I always reply to comments, so I'll see if I can help you out. Additionally, if you found this video useful or you want to support the channel, hit that thumbs up button. If you have a friend who is also suffering with golfer's elbow, then please share this with them. But that has been it for today, guys. Have a strong week and peace.